Hello, welcome to Baltic World. My name is Crispin. I have an absolutely insane story for you today. The thumbnail is not clickbait. The story I have is from news.com.au. I will read it out to you and we will go through some analysis. It's titled 100,000 North Korean soldiers could be sent to bolster Putin's forces fighting Ukraine. An army of soldiers from one of the world's most authoritarian nations could be sent to bolster Vladimir Putin's forces in Ukraine. A leading defense expert in Moscow, Reserve Colonel Igor Korochenko, told state TV, quote, "We shouldn't be shy in accepting the hand extended to us by Kim Jong-un." North Korea has made it clear through diplomatic channels that as well as providing builders to repair war damage, it is ready to supply a vast fighting force, reported Regnum News Agency. They would be deployed to the forces of the separatist pro-Putin Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic, both of which Kim has recently recognized as independent countries. And actually, North Korea recognized it about 3 or 4 weeks ago, Ukraine immediately cutting off all diplomatic connection with North Korea as a consequence. Anyway, reading on. The country is ready to transfer up to 100,000 of its soldiers to Donbas, said the report by the pro-Kremlin news agency. Pyongyang will be able to transfer its tactical units to Donbas. In return, grain and energy would be supplied to Kim's stricken economy. The claim was seized on by Korochenko, editor-in-chief of Russia's National Defense Journal on Rossiya 1 channel, who said, "These are reports that 100,000 North Korean volunteers are prepared to come and take part in the conflict." So why do I see this story as completely credible? Well, first of all, North Korea should not be considered a country in the traditional sense. I have been to North Korea, and I assure you that's not how the North Koreans view themselves. The DPRK is a movement. It views the Korean peninsula as one whole. There is no north and south. There is just Korea, artificially divided, with the South under American imperialist yoke, that the North Koreans are struggling year after year, generation after generation, to liberate their South Korean brothers and sisters from foreign occupation. That's genuinely how they see this. And that means putting an army first policy. They know they're poor, but the justification they have for it is foreign sanctions and the sacrifices they're making to put a military posture capable of reuniting the peninsula, at least in their propaganda. So they see Russia as a fellow socialist country, still Marxist in their minds, and would be more than willing to donate 100,000 soldiers to fight Russian wars abroad, which the North Koreans will be indoctrinated into believing is part of the global communist struggle. It's also impossible to overstate just how different the mentality is in North Korea. There's no internet, no outside information, no advertising. They wouldn't recognize McDonald's or Starbucks or Coca-Cola or any of that. All there is the leadership. And it's not some god they have to have faith and believe in. It's someone you see, feel, and touch. So from the time that you're born to the moment you die in North Korea, you're told there is someone there just for you. They're perfect in every way. They do everything right. They have grand plans for the country. And even though you're an imperfect person, that's okay. You do your best and they will love you anyway. So the propaganda goes. Secondly, North Korea already uses labor as a significant export, including to Russia. One of North Korea's biggest exports is in the Russian Siberian timber mills, where North Korean workers proliferate. So North Korea will send these people to work in absolutely inhuman conditions, slave-like conditions, for the Russian economy in the worst temperatures imaginable. And yet, by North Korean standards, the workers there are still living the high life. There is high levels of competition to be able to go abroad for that purpose. So when the North Koreans say they're willing to send 100,000 volunteers, it's true that they're not really volunteers. They'll be ordered to go, much like when China intervened in the Korean War, they sent 300,000 quote-unquote volunteers, which of course were ordered in as members of the People's Liberation Army. Nevertheless, there will be a high degree of enthusiasm among the troops to go and fight in Ukraine, indoctrinated as they are under the belief that they'll be fighting the global imperialist capitalists, and by fighting in Ukraine, they'll also be helping to preserve their movement at home by defeating the Americans abroad. Well, how will this impact combat operations? Well, first of all, 100,000 soldiers entering the conflict from abroad will radically change the circumstances on the ground. It's important not to underestimate the North Koreans. They are sickly. They have been malnourished their entire lives. They'll be much smaller than the Ukrainians that they're fighting, but they will have fanatical indoctrination. They will truly believe that this is a life and death struggle, and they will fight with a great deal of enthusiasm because that's what they have been fed from a very young age that they're born to do. They're also incredible sappers. They dig a lot of tunnels. They will bring new tactics that the Ukrainians are not familiar with. And a big question mark is how are they going to be trained and equipped and brought into the Russian army? There'll be a massive language barrier. They'll only speak Korean. There won't be many in the Russian armed forces in the officer corps that will be able to speak Korean. So how they'll be incorporated is unknown, but one presumes that they'll overcome those logistical issues. Will they be wearing North Korean uniforms, carrying North Korean weapons, or will they be put into Russian uniforms? That's a big question mark as well. Because if it's North Koreans wearing North Korean uniforms, then you could argue that the DPRK has directly entered the war as a combatant in Ukraine. Whereas if they're wearing Russian uniforms that they're embedded in Russian platoons and brigades, then you could call them more mercenaries, volunteers from abroad, like we see volunteers fighting on the Ukrainian side from all across Europe and abroad. In terms of what Russia can provide North Korea, I have no doubt that that deal is possible. After all, Russia is offering significant incentives for Russians to volunteer and go and fight in Ukraine. The amount of money they're offering new recruits is extremely high by Russian standards. In fact, it's quite high even by most Western standards. You get an upfront sum of money plus about $4,000 or $5,000 a month, which is quite a lot for a Russian soldier, and an infinite sum of money for a North Korean. So at a government-to-government level, there's no doubt that Russia can provide North Korea, the North Korean regime, what it wants in order to receive these 100,000 troops. In terms of the Western response, unfortunately, there are very limited options. North Korea is already heavily sanctioned by the West in terms of its humanitarian atrocities, its nuclear weapons program, its ballistic missile program. So there aren't new economic measures that the West can seriously impose in North Korea. The only foreign country that has significant influence over the Kim family is China, with Nancy Pelosi's recent visit to Taiwan. US-China relations are at an all-time low. It's highly probable that not only will China do nothing to support new sanctions on North Korea, they may even help facilitate the equipment and movement of these troops from North Korea to the front in Ukraine, supporting their Russian ally that way. But this situation is a complete disaster, and it's been successive American administrations that have failed to act to curb North Korea's nuclear program, which has meant that we're now in this situation where the North Korea has nothing to fear by doing this. There is very little that the West can do militarily to respond to North Korea. All they can do is respond by providing extra support to Ukraine to defend its territory against this huge influx of new forces. It gives this conflict a kind of global scale. When we see large numbers of North Koreans fighting on the other side of the world, it will at least in turn draw attention by the Europeans towards what's happening in East Asia. So far, Lithuania has been the one standing up to China and Chinese authoritarianism. But if they start to see large numbers of North Koreans who clearly have no business being in this conflict pouring in to support the Russian side, then a lot of questions will be asked about China in Western Europe, and hopefully they will start to pull together not only to support Ukraine, but also to support the United States in East Asia. And that means increasing defense spending, working together within NATO to create greater cohesion across Europe and ensure that America is freed up to concentrate on the new struggle that is occurring over Taiwan against China and East Asia, and also to help deal with this North Korean threat. Because At the moment, it's just this rogue terrorist state that is selling its troops to the highest bidder. In this case, it's going to Russia to support its genocidal war in the east of Ukraine. And North Korea has already recognized those breakaway regions, one of the very few political entities in the world to do so. So this is a terrible development. The one saving grace is it does draw attention to China's role in all of this, because North Korea will certainly be receiving a lot of support from China in order to do this. So will Russia. I'll watch closely how this plays out. I find it very unlikely the Russians are going to take the North Korean allies very seriously. I expect Russia to use North Koreans as fodder, put them in the front line, put them in harm's way, try and minimize their own casualties. That might create some resentment between Russia and North Korea over time. We will see. And hopefully the Ukrainians are able to effectively respond. This becomes a new proxy conflict wherein the United States and other countries that are supporting Ukraine will be fighting North Korea through this proxy conflict. And this global characteristic changes how the world will perceive this conflict, both immediately and in years to come. At the moment, the British intelligence have been reporting significant relocation of Russian forces to try and reinforce Kherson. They're anticipating a major offensive. Those that have seen my HIMARS video would know how effective they have been at neutralizing Russian artillery. The HIMARS have also been used to cut off Kherson from potential support by destroying bridges and other infrastructure, allowing the Ukrainians to go on the offensive in the east in a truly major way for perhaps the first time. Hopefully they'll be able to retake occupied territory, and of course I'll keep you updated on that as well. If you found value in this discussion, please like this video. Subscribe if you haven't already. Most people who watch this channel are not actually subscribers. So please, if I've earned your subscription, it costs nothing. It helps grow the channel a ton. If you do want to support us, you can support us on Contribui, a Lithuanian startup, which is a Patreon alternative. Love the people that work behind the scenes there. And I will see you next time. Goodbye.